Damaged Defenders by Scherzad. Chapter 68. Loki. Loki hadn't been sure why Stephen wanted him to stay with Xavier when the man interrogated Belova. Protection, perhaps? It was the most likely explanation. Loki wasn't about to make the mistake of thinking Belova was helpless or truly contained. If she was even half so capable as Romanov, Belova would be dangerous, even drugged into unconsciousness. And Xavier was physically vulnerable. Loki had every intention of speaking with the healers on Asgard when they all headed there in a few days. Xavier would be going with them, which would make it easy for the healers to kidnap him and see if they could do anything for him. Due to the fact he was paralyzed, and had been apparently for quite some time, as humans measure time anyway, they might not be able to help. Asgard's healers were some of the best, but spinal injuries were some of the trickiest injuries to deal with. At any rate, Loki had followed Xavier down to the cell holding Belova. Belova and Xavier had a quite intense staring contest for about 15 minutes before Xavier blinked and gave his head a shake, then motioned for them to head out. Once they were in the elevator, Xavier spoke. "Well, I have several names, and more faces. I'll have one of our students who is good at art do some drawings. Jarvis might be able to ferret out who they are from there, or perhaps Romanov or Agent Coulson will recognize the face and have a name for them," Xavier said. "Other than that, it is as Miss Romanov declared. The Red Room has decided the Avengers are to be eliminated, though I think they badly underestimated everyone's capabilities. I don't know that being shot would have done anything to yourself or your brother. Logan would have just gotten quite angry. And that would have resulted in Hulk making his appearance felt if they shot Dr. Banner." Loki summed up. "Quite, though there is a remote chance shooting him might work, if they used a powerful enough bullet from enough of a distance that he was unaware of the danger. That is wholly speculative, however," Xavier said. "It is entirely possible that Dr. Banner would still transform even under those conditions." "The Red Room must have had the same thought. It would explain why they sent a sniper," Loki said. "Well above and beyond the fact that killing us at that sort of distance would really be safest for them. If we did not know we were under threat, or could not divine the direction the shooting was coming from quickly enough, they could potentially kill half or more of our number." Loki scowled darkly. "Of course, they would then have to deal with the other, less mortal half of the group, and that would not have been a pleasant proposition for them." Xavier made a noise somewhere between amusement and disapproval. The amusement was obviously due to the extreme understatement. Loki had gotten the distinct impression the man was a pacifist, which would explain the disapproval. Men such as him disliked violence, no matter the cause. Loki had never understood that sort of mentality. While he was by no means as given to violence as Thor tended to be, Loki had long agreed with at least one of the maxims Asgardians held dear. To wit, the only good enemy was a dead enemy. Leaving enemies alive only ever created problems in the future, Laufey being a case in point. Yes, Loki had expedited things and done a bit of inciting, but he hadn't had to do all that much. Laufey had been all too eager to strike back at Odin. They headed up to the common room floor. As they settled in, Xavier spoke again. "In another matter entirely, I would very much like to ask a few questions," Xavier asked, expression somewhat hesitant. "I cannot guarantee that I will answer," Loki told him, "or even know the answer depending on the question, though if it is the latter I might be able to refer you to someone who does." "I quite understand, and thank you in advance. My questions mostly have to do with a collection of stories known as the Eddas, which tell stories of the Norse gods," Xavier said. "I'm rather understandably curious as to whether or not there's any truth in the tales, given that at least some of the people in the tales actually exist, but are not gods." Loki scowled at the man in exasperated amusement. "This is about the horse thing, isn't it?" he asked, then sighed. "I swear to the Norns, if I ever find out who started that story, I will find a way to go back in time and beat them senseless. Yes, Sleipnir exists. No, I did not shapeshift into a horse to beget him." Loki scowled at Xavier, but he was more amused than offended. Humans were truly perverse. The situation was made worse by the fact that it was almost possible. Loki could, if he so desired, shapeshift into a mare. He could even, if he was willing to debase himself so, have sex in that form. That said, he would not be able to reproduce because while he would look and be able to act like a horse, he was not genetically a horse. He supposed there might be spells to allow such a thing, but he was not that perverse, so he never thought to investigate the matter. Sleipnir was my last and best attempt at gaining some favor in Odin's eye, Loki told Xavier. I cast spells on the best stallion and mare in the royal stables to bring him into being. And before you ask, no, I do not have any children, though the creatures mentioned as my children in the Eddas do or did exist. Fenrir was Odin's pet, and died of old age roughly a century after I was brought to Asgard. Nari and Vari were two of his sons, and my and Thor's pets until they too died of old age several centuries ago. Jormungand was an enormous water dragon that troubled Vanir for some centuries before he was killed. I suppose he was made a snake in the tails because water dragons greatly resemble snakes. Hela, well, she is another matter entirely. She is death, the being Thanos is so enamored of. Oh, well, the representation of that being. Every race has their own tale of what death looks like. It is highly unlikely anyone will ever find out what death truly looks like and be able to pass on the information. Because they would, at that point, be dead for keeps. The varying descriptions of death's appearance all came from people who had come within a whisker of dying and been dragged back to life by whatever means. Loki was of the opinion that those folks saw either what would give them the most comfort, or scare the crap out of them, depending on the life that person had led and how it was they came so close to dying. That was the only explanation for both comforting agents of death, like the Valkyries or Midgardian angels, and less comforting agents, like the Midgardian devil. Right about then, Thor showed up. Loki got one look at his face and let Thor have his way. Arguing with Thor when he got like this was like arguing with a wall. You got precisely nowhere. The worst part of it, of course, was the fact that Thor was right. Loki was in dire need of rest. Not that he'd be getting any. He knew better than that, even with Thor intending to guard his sleep, and apparently that of Steven as well. Loki doubted that Steven's attempt at sleep would be any more successful than his own. The dim gleam of distant stars provided little light to illuminate the pitch black of space. Just barely enough for Loki to perceive the pitted, crumbling surface of the asteroid on which he knelt and the looming shape of his tormentor. You think you have escaped me, little rat. You are mine, little Jotun. I shall take great pleasure in reacquiring you. Accompanying those last words were horrifying visions. Thor, rent limb from limb, Frigga basely used and tortured for his erstwhile captor's amusement. Fleeting glimpses of the residents of the realms dying in increasingly horrifying ways while the realms burned. And all the while himself kept alive, forced to watch as everything he knew was destroyed utterly. Loki came awake with a horrified, terrified shriek. Before he was anywhere near coherent, something loomed into his line of sight, and Loki instinctively flung a spell as he scrambled back and away, crashing to the floor in an ignominious heap. A startled yell indicated he'd hit someone with the spell. He managed to jam himself into a corner, shaking violently and perilously close to gibbering in fear. That had been no dream. The idea that Thanos could... terrified about covered it. Thor's voice penetrated the haze of fear, and more than a bit belatedly, Loki remembered he'd gone to sleep in Thor's room, which meant it had to have been Thor he'd hit with that spell. Oops. At least he'd been too panicked for more than a shove the person away sort of spell. At worst, Thor's pride would be dented. Before Loki could make sense of what Thor was saying, Thor had him in a bear hug. Loki jerked, still freaked out enough to instinctively want away from anything constraining him. Thor, damn him, was too strong for Loki to dislodge, at least under these circumstances. If Loki put his mind to it and did more than flail about like a fish out of water, he could win free of Thor's grasp, but right now, such a thing was beyond Loki. Loki had no idea how long they sat like that before he calmed down enough to make sense. Thor had not ceased to rumble. What Loki was willing to bet had been reassurance of some sort, given what he heard from Thor in the few minutes after he calmed down sufficiently to pay attention. Loki was rattled enough that he did not immediately attempt to win free from Thor when he calmed down. Eventually, though, he did speak up so that Thor would know he was mostly back to himself. Mostly. I think sleep is going to be a problem for a long time to come, Thor, Loki admitted. Especially since it seems he can reach me still. He was taunting me with what he planned to do. Thor growled and tightened his grip on Loki briefly. Let me guess. Visions of horrible deaths for those you care about. Among other things, Loki agreed. Thor snorted. They will not come to pass, brother. I know. It does not make them any less terrifying, horrifying, or disturbing, Loki pointed out, even though there was a part of him that feared Thanos winning despite all they were and would be doing to stop him. We will speak with Mother in the morning. There may be something she could do to help shield you from such torment, Thor said. Let us hope, Loki agreed. Otherwise he was going to have a major problem. They'd been quiet for a little while, long enough for Loki to begin contemplating the wisdom of attempting sleep again, when a shout came from the next room. It would seem you were wise to keep the both of us under your watch, brother, Loki said. Go, drag him in here if you must. I doubt he will be any more eager than I for sleep this night. Thor snorted but did leave. He came back in a few minutes later with Steven trailing behind him looking miserable. Come to keep me company, Steven, since neither of us is likely to sleep again tonight. Thor will doubtlessly be sound asleep in a trice. Loki rolled his eyes semi-affectionately at Thor. But then he can sleep through a dragon throwing a temper tantrum, so that is hardly surprising. Steven perked up a little bit. Dragons are real? He asked. Oh, yes. Though they bear little resemblance to dragons as depicted by Midgardian artists. There are numerous breeds that specialize. Ice dragons, water dragons, fire dragons, and several others, each as bad as the next and exceedingly difficult to kill, Loki told him. Huh. Where did they originally come from, or does anyone know? Steve asked. No one has the faintest idea. The most popular school of thought is that they were spawned in the void between stars, since nothing that even remotely resembles a home realm has been found for any of them, Loki said. He and Steven continued to talk about dragons, and from there a number of other legendary beings like phoenixes, unicorns, centaurs, and the like. Some of the creatures in Midgardian tales were based on actual creatures, while others were not. Phoenixes, for example, had been based on a bird once native to Muspelheim before it was laid to waste. Some few of the birds, and a few other beasts of that realm, had escaped their realm and found homes in volcanoes on other realms over the millennia. Volcanoes being the closest any of the other realms had to Muspelheim's environment. It was entirely possible that Midgard had even played host to one or more of the birds for a time, or that one or more still resided here. Earth had a number of active volcanoes after all. Centaurs, on the other hand, had been solely the result of an exceedingly perverse, imaginative mind. Such a being had never existed anywhere in the realms, nor had any of the other part-man, part-beast creatures in Midgardian tales. Somewhere before dawn, Loki dozed off again. This time his sleep went undisturbed.